The wind howled across the barren landscape, whipping dust and debris through the air as the sun set low over the horizon. It was a harsh, unforgiving world, a place where only the toughest survived. Man, weak and half-dead, staggered across the dusty plains. His steps were faltering, his body a hollow shell of what it once was. But his will to survive pushed him forward, one painful step after another. His name was Marcus. He was a human. His ship had crash-landed days ago, the wreckage scattered. Across the rocky terrain, the crash had left him with little more than a few basic supplies and the hope of somehow finding shelter. But the vast planet he found himself on was inhospitable, filled with dangers he could not have prepared for. And now, with his body weakening and his mind fading, he wondered if this would be the end of his journey. But fate had other plans. It was then that the aliens found him. A group of settlers, a mix of various species from distant corners of the UHS galaxy, were returning to their village when they spotted Marcus. His faint figure was barely visible in the dusk, hunched over and struggling to keep moving. At first, they weren't sure what they were looking at. Was it a wild creature? Dangerous enemy? But as they got closer, their suspicions turned to something else, something more human. One of them, a woman named Zira, took the first step. She had never seen a human before, but there was something in her heart that told her to help this fragile being. Her people had long lived in isolation, far from the rest of the galaxy, but they still held compassion. She ordered the others to approach cautiously, but gently. Marcus wasn't a threat. He was a survivor, just like them, stranded in a world he didn't understand. The group of settlers carefully lifted Marcus into their arms, offering him comfort and warmth. They brought him back to their village. Small settlement nestled in a valley, surrounded by towering cliffs and dark forests. The village was a place of refuge, where the alien species lived in peace, away from the rest of the galaxy. But it was also a place that had seen better days. Their food supply was low, their resources scarce. And now, a human had arrived, unwelcome, unknown, and in desperate need of help. Zira led Marcus into a small shelter, a humble building made of stone and wood. The air was thick with the smell of herbs and healing plants, and the soft hum of machinery filled the background. She called for help, and the other settlers rushed in to assist. "We'll take care of him," one of the healers said as they gently laid Marcus down on a soft bed. His condition was worse than they had expected. His body was thin, his skin pale, and his breathing shallow. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days. Zira stayed close by, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face. She didn't understand why, but something about him made her feel a deep sense of responsibility. Perhaps it was the way he had fought for survival, the way he had pushed himself, even when his body had given out. Or perhaps it was simply because he was human, and humans had always been a mystery to her people. Either way, she felt an unspoken bond with him. Hours passed, and the settlers worked tirelessly to care for Marcus. They gave him food, water, and the best healing herbs they had. Slowly, his condition improved. His breathing became steadier, and his color began to return. But even as he regained strength, Marcus remained unconscious, lost in the depths of his own mind. He was still trapped in his own desperate thoughts, haunted by the crash and the loss of his home. Zira sat by his side, waiting, her mind racing. What did he need? Why had he come here? Was he truly a friend, or just another threat to their fragile existence? The village had already seen its fair share of troubled alien factions had tried to invade. The planet's resources were dwindling, and the settlers were growing weary. Yet they had never faced a human before. And now, here was Marcus, a stranger from a world they could only dream of, offering no answers and no guarantees. It wasn't until the next day that Marcus finally opened his eyes. At first, everything was a blur, a haze of light and colors that made his head spin. His body felt heavy, as if it didn't belong to him anymore. He blinked, trying to clear his vision, and then slowly he focused on the face before him. A woman, an alien woman, with soft green skin and dark eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom. "Where am I?" Marcus's voice was rough, barely. Above a whisper, "You're safe," Zira replied, her voice soft and calm. "You're in our village. You've been hurt, but you're going to be okay." He was weak, far weaker than he had expected. He had no memory of how he had arrived here, no recollection of being brought to the village. Everything was a fog. What? What happened? My ship? I was... Zira placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, urging him to rest. "Your ship crashed. You were found by our people. We brought you here to heal." Marcus stared at her, confusion clouding his mind. This was impossible. How could this be happening? He'd been so close to death just hours ago, and now he was in some alien village, surrounded by beings he had never seen before. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly, though the words felt hollow. He didn't know what else to say. He was stranded, alone, and he had no idea how to get back home. But for the first time in days, he didn't feel completely hopeless. Zero smiled faintly. "You don't have to thank us. We're all travelers here in one way or another." And with that, Marcus drifted back into unconsciousness, the weight of his situation settling deeper into his heart. The journey ahead would be long and full of uncertainty, but for now he was safe. He had shelter. He had a chance. Little did Marcus know, this was only the beginning. The settlers would not let him go so easily, and he would soon find himself entangled in their struggles, whether he wanted to be or not. The days that followed Marcus's recovery were a blur of strange sounds, unfamiliar faces, and odd customs. Zira, the alien woman who had cared for him, remained by his side. She was patient, kind, and had a quiet strength that made Marcus feel both safe and uneasy. He didn't know why, but he felt like he was being watched, not just by Zira, but by everyone in the village. The alien settlers had welcomed him with open arms, but there was an air of caution that hung over every interaction. He wasn't sure if it was because he was human, or because they were unsure whether he could truly be trusted. As he regained his strength, Aku slowly began to explore the settlement. The village was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The buildings were made of a mix of organic and stone materials, designed to blend into the environment rather than disrupt it. It felt peaceful, almost serene, yet there was an undeniable tension in the air. The people lived quietly, but there was something more beneath the surface, a quiet desperation, a fear of the unknown. Zero had told him that their planet was isolated, far from the rest of the galaxy. Their people had been cut off for centuries, hiding from a war they could never escape. The past was something they never spoke of, and the present was something they tried to forget. But Marcus could sense the fear, the uncertainty, and he knew that they had lived in isolation for far too long. One afternoon, as he walked through the village, he encountered a group of alien settlers gathered around a large fire. They spoke in low tones, casting occasional glances at Marcus as he passed. Their eyes were full of suspicion, but also curiosity. He had become a part of their world, but they hadn't fully accepted him yet. He could feel their eyes following him, and the weight of their silent judgment pressed on him. Zero noticed the tension and approached Marcus as he stood by the fire. "They're not used to having strangers among them," she explained quietly, her voice gentle. "Especially humans. You're different. You don't belong here yet. ... You do. It makes them uneasy." Marcus nodded, his thoughts drifting back to the crash. He had been alone, lost in space, with no way to contact Earth. And now here he was stuck on an alien world, surrounded by beings who were trying their best to help him, but at the same time, they didn't fully understand him. It was as though he was a puzzle they didn't know how to solve. "I don't belong here," Marcus said softly, more to himself than to Zira. "I don't even belong on this planet. I need to find a way home." Zira looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You are not the only one here who wants to leave. But sometimes we don't get to choose where we end up." The words stung, but Marcus couldn't deny their truth. He had lost everything: his ship, his crew, his home. The Earth he had once known was nothing more than a distant memory. And now he was just a visitor in a world that wasn't his own. He couldn't stay here forever. He had to find a way to get back to Earth. But as the days passed, something began to change inside him. The settlers, despite their reservations, began to treat him as one of their own. They offered him food, shelter, and even began to teach him their ways. He learned their language, their customs, and how they lived in harmony with their planet. They showed him how they harvested plants, built their homes, and lived off the land. It was a simple life, but it was one they cherished. Marcus wasn't sure if he was ready to accept it, but he was starting to feel a sense of connection to these beings. He had always thought of humanity as superior, stronger, smarter, better, equipped to handle the universe's challenges. But now, as he watched the aliens work together, solving problems and taking care of each other, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. They were survivors too, perhaps in their own way. They had something to teach him one evening. As Marcus worked alongside the settlers to repair a broken irrigation system, Zira approached him again. "You're starting to fit in," she said with a small smile. "They trust you now, more than they did before." Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow, glancing up at her. "I don't know if I can ever truly fit in here. I'm not like them. I'm human. I'm still trying to figure out if I can ever go back to Earth." Zira placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not about fitting in. It's about finding a place where you can belong. You may never return to Earth, Marcus, but you have a choice now. You can make a life here with us." The words lingered in the air between them, heavy with meaning. To respond, could he truly make a life here? Could he let go of his past and accept this strange new world as his own? The thought seemed impossible, but it was the first time he had ever considered it. Maybe Earth was too far away, too lost, to be found. Maybe it was time to stop searching for what he couldn't have and start looking at what was right in front of him. But as the days turned into weeks, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The settlers were too quiet, too secretive about their past. Zira had shared some details with him, but there were many things she hadn't said. He could feel their fear. The way they looked at him like he was a piece of a puzzle they hadn't quite figured out. And the longer he stayed, the more he realized something else. The settlers weren't just surviving. They were running from something dark. The villagers were careful not to speak of it openly, but Marcus could sense it. They feared an enemy, something that had driven them into hiding all those years ago. And now, with him here, their secrets seemed to weigh. Even heavier on their shoulders, Zira noticed the change in Marcus. She saw the uncertainty in his eyes, the way he began to distance himself from the others. "You're still searching for a way back to Earth," she said one day, as they sat together near the edge of the village. "But sometimes the only way forward is to stop running from the past." Marcus didn't know what she meant. But as he looked at the people around him, the ones who had helped him survive, he wondered if he was ready to face whatever secrets the village held on, if he could truly become a part of this strange new world. The sun had begun to rise over the village, casting long shadows across the stone paths and lush green fields that surrounded the settlement. Marcus stood near the village's edge, looking out at the quiet landscape. The planet's beauty was undeniable with its wide-open spaces, towering trees, and vibrant plant life. But for Marcus, it was still foreign. It wasn't Earth, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong here. But something had changed in him over the past few weeks. The settlers, once hesitant and uncertain around him, had slowly begun to accept him. They treated him with respect, as though he was one of their own. Zira, the woman who had first helped him, had become his guide to their world. She had patiently taught him their ways, showing him how to farm, repair tools, and communicate with the other settlers. The longer Marcus stayed, the more he found himself growing attached to these strange, kind people. He had never thought much about the needs of others before, but here, in this village, he saw how each person depended on the other. There was no room for pride or selfishness. Everyone had a role to play, and together they survived. Had never seen anything like it before. Earth had always been about competition and individual success. But here, survival meant working together. One afternoon, as Marcus worked with Zira to help rebuild the village's irrigation system, the leader of the settlement, A tall, stoic alien named Ron approached them. Rowan was a quiet man, but his presence was commanding. The villagers respected him deeply, and he rarely spoke unless it was necessary. Today, however, he seemed to have something important on his mind. "Marcus," Ron said, his voice deep and steady. "You've proven yourself useful here. We need your help with something." Marcus paused, wiping the sweat from his brow. "What do you need me to do?" Rahone glanced around as if to make sure no one was listening. "We've been struggling to keep our crops healthy. The soil is becoming less fertile, and we need to find a way to improve it." "You've worked with Earth technology, yes?" Marcus nodded. He hadn't expected the conversation to go in this direction, but it made sense. His background in engineering and mechanics could be useful here. "I've worked on agricultural systems back on Earth," Marcus said. "I can help with the irrigation, the tools, or any equipment you need." Rand's expression softened slightly. "Need someone who understands technology, someone who can fix what we can't. You've already shown us your skills. We need your help to repair our machinery and improve our crops. If you're willing to stay, I believe you can be a valuable part of our community." Marcus wasn't sure what to say. He'd been trying to push the idea of staying behind to the back of his mind. His only goal had been to return to Earth, but the more time he spent here, the more he realized he had found something he had never expected: purpose. For the first time since his crash, he felt like he was needed, like his skills mattered. "I'll help," Marcus said quietly, his voice filled with determination. "If you need me, I'm here." Ra nodded, his eyes showing a hint of approval. "Good. You'll be working with Tora. She's the best in our village when it comes to farming. But we need your expertise to fix the equipment. We'll start tomorrow." As Rowan turned and walked away, Zira looked at Marcus, her eyes filled with curiosity. "You've accepted the offer, then?" Marcus hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I don't know what the future holds, Zira, but I can't keep running. I need to do something. I can't just sit here waiting to be rescued. Maybe this is where I'm meant to be." Zira smiled softly, a warm, understanding expression on her face. "It's not about where you're meant to be, Marcus. It's about what you choose to do with the time you have. You've already shown us that you care. That's more than most people ever do." Marcus wasn't sure if he believed her words, but he appreciated the sentiment. For the first time since his crash, he felt like he had a role to play, a purpose to fulfill. The village had become his responsibility, and that responsibility weighed heavily on his shoulders. The next day, Marcus was introduced to Tora Ann. Alien woman, with rough, calloused hands and a stern demeanor. She had a sharp mind and a quick temper, but there was no mistaking her skill when it came to farming. She had been working with the land for as long as Marcus could remember, but her methods were starting to fail as the planet's environment continued to change. Marcus was surprised by how quickly Tora embraced the idea of working together. They spent hours each day repairing machines, adjusting irrigation systems, and experimenting with ways to enrich the soil. It was hard work, but it was rewarding. Marcus began to see how vital their efforts were. The village depended on its crops to survive, and without a solution, they would starve. During their work, Marcus started to notice the subtle ways in which the settlers interacted with him. There was a growing sense of trust, but also an unspoken tension. They needed him, but they were still unsure of whether he would stay. Would he become a part of their community, or would he leave when the opportunity arose? Marcus could feel the weight of their hopes and fears pressing down on him as the days turned into weeks. Marcus found himself becoming more and more integrated into the village. He spent long hours working alongside Tora, Zira, and the others, fixing machines and helping them with their daily tasks. He was no longer just an outsider. He had a place here, but with every passing day, the question of his future grew louder. Would he leave when he found a way to escape? Would he stay and help the settlers build a better life for themselves? It was a question that had no easy answer. But Marcus knew one thing for certain. He was no longer the man who had crash-landed here. He was someone different now, someone who had learned the value of connection and the importance of working together. And as much as he longed to return to Earth, he couldn't help but wonder if his journey was leading him somewhere far greater than he could have imagined. The days in the village passed like the slow, steady rhythm of the seasons. Marcus had settled into his new life, no longer just a stranger, but a valuable member of the community. His days were spent repairing tools, helping with farming, and learning more about the unique way of life on this alien world. The settlers, though still cautious, had begun to see him as someone they could depend on. They trusted him, and for the first time since his crash, Marcus felt like he belonged. But despite the warmth and kindness of the settlers, something in the village still felt off. There was an undercurrent of unease that Marcus couldn't quite shake. The villagers had accepted him, but they were strangely tight-lipped about their past. The more time he spent with them, the more he sensed that they were hiding something. It was in the way they spoke in hushed tones when they thought no one was listening. The way they looked over their shoulders as if someone or something was watching them. Zira, the woman who had cared for him since his arrival, seemed to be the only one who trusted him completely. She had shared much of the village's history with him, though never in great detail. She told him about their isolation, how their people had been cut off from the rest of the galaxy for centuries, hiding from a war they couldn't escape. But she never mentioned the enemy, the one that had forced them into hiding. It was as though the very mention of it was forbidden. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the village, Marcus sat outside his small shelter, staring into the fire. He had spent the day working on the irrigation system again, but his mind was elsewhere. The weight of the unanswered questions pressed on him. What were the settlers so afraid of? What had driven them into hiding all those years ago? Zira approached him, her footsteps soft on the dirt path. She sat beside him, looking into the fire with a quiet intensity. Marcus could feel her presence, calm and steady, yet there was something distant about her. Something that spoke of secrets she wasn't ready to share. "You've been quiet lately," Zira said, her voice gentle. "Something is on your mind." Marcus looked at her, searching her face for any hint of the truth. "I can't shake the feeling that there's something you're not telling me, something important." Zira didn't answer right away. She stared into the fire, her expression unreadable. Marcus waited, his heart pounding. He had to know the truth. He couldn't stay here in the dark forever. "I know you've been curious," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper, "and you deserve to know. But it's not easy to talk about. Our past is ... complicated." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes fixed on her. "I don't understand. Why won't you tell me?" Zira sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "Because the truth is dangerous. It could destroy everything we've worked for. We've lived in peace for so long, and that's all we want. To stay hidden, to survive. But the truth," she paused, as if weighing her words carefully, "the truth is that we are not alone. Not in the way you think. And there's an enemy out there that's been hunting us for years." Heart skipped a beat. "An enemy? But ... why didn't you tell me before?" Zira turned to face him, her eyes dark and heavy with fear. "Because it's not just any enemy. It's the one that destroyed our home. The one that forced us to leave everything behind. We came here to escape, but they followed us. They're out there waiting. If they ever find us again, it will be the end of everything." Marcus sat back, stunned by her words. The peaceful village, the kind and helpful settlers, it was all built on a foundation of fear. They had been living on borrowed time, hiding from an enemy they couldn't defeat. "Why didn't you tell the others?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling. "Why didn't they warn me?" Zira's eyes softened. "We don't speak of them. Not openly. It's a rule we followed for generations. If we keep our heads down, if we don't draw attention to ourselves, we might survive. But if they knew ... if they knew the truth, it would tear us apart. There are some things the settlers can't bear to face." Marcus felt a wave of sadness wash over him. He understood now. The settlers had built this life from the ground up, and their fear had kept them going. They were just trying to survive, trying to live in peace, but the past wouldn't let them go. It haunted them, waiting for the right moment to strike. Zira stood up, her face hardening. "I'm sorry, Marcus. Should have told you sooner. But it's not easy." We can't afford to make mistakes. Marcus stood with her, his mind spinning. What are we going to do? How do we fight something we can't even see? Zira looked at him with determination in her eyes. We can't fight them directly. Not yet, but we can prepare. We've been working on something that might give us a chance, a way to defend ourselves if they come. It's not much, but it's a start. Marcus's mind raced. A way to fight back? A way to stand? Up to the enemy? The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. We'll need your help, Zira said, her voice steady. You're not just a survivor anymore, Marcus. You're one of us. Yes. And together, we'll make sure they never find us. Yes. As Zira turned to walk back into the village, Marcus felt a strange sense of resolve settle in his chest. He had come here as a stranger, a man lost in space, with no home and no future. But now, he had a purpose. He had a place in this world, and he wasn't going to let it fall apart. The secrets of the settlement were out now, and with them came the truth. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. The days that followed Zira's revelation were filled with a new sense of urgency. Marcus had always known that his crash on this alien planet had been an accident, a twist of fate that had left him stranded with no way back home. But now, the truth of the settlers' situation weighed heavily on him. They were hiding. They were survivors, yes, but they were also hunted by a past they couldn't escape. Every time Marcus walked through the village, he could feel the tension in the air. The settlers had always been kind, but now it was as if they were walking on eggshells, afraid that any wrong move would draw the attention of their enemies. Marcus couldn't ignore the feeling that he, too, was part of the secret they were trying to keep. He wasn't just a visitor anymore, he was a symbol, a living connection to a world beyond their own. Zira had told him that the settlers were working on something, to defend themselves from the enemy that had followed them to this planet. But she had given him little more than that. Marcus needed answers. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the only way to truly help these people was to understand the enemy. To learn what they were facing and how he could play a part in their fight for survival, he decided to take matters into his own hands. The following day, Marcus went to the village's archives, a small building that contained records of the settlers. History, it was a quiet place, filled with dusty shelves and faded papers. Zira had told him that most of the records were locked away, sealed by a code only a few people knew. But Marcus had spent years studying technology and systems back on Earth. He wasn't going to let something as simple as a code stop him. He sat at a table, fingers hovering over the dusty console. He knew the risks. If he was caught, there would be no going back. The settlers had kept their secrets for a reason, and the last thing they needed was a human poking around in their past. But he had no choice. The truth was the only way forward. With a few quick keystrokes, Marcus bypassed the code lock. The screen flickered to life, revealing a vast archive of information. His eyes scanned through the records, documents detailing the history of the settlers, their escape from the war, and the technology they had discovered. But it wasn't until he found the classified files that the true horror of their past began to reveal itself. The enemy was not just any alien force. They were an advanced species, relentless in their pursuit of anything they deemed a threat. The settlers had once been a powerful civilization, spread across multiple planets, but they had made one grave mistake in overestimating their enemies. The war had torn their world apart, and they had fled, hoping to escape.
Ow.
But the enemy had followed, tracking them across the stars, and they had destroyed everything in their path. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he read the files. These weren't just conquerors, they were hunters. Ruthless and cold, they hunted not for resources, but for the thrill of the kill. Now they were out there, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The realization hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. The settlers hadn't just fled to survive, they had been running for their lives, trying to stay one step ahead of a force that would destroy them without a second thought. And now, that same force was on their doorstep. Suddenly, the door to the archive creaked open. Marcus quickly closed the files, his heart pounding. Zira stepped inside, her eyes narrowing as she noticed the tension in the air. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice calm, but with an edge of concern. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He wasn't sure what to say. He'd already crossed a line by accessing the records. But he couldn't lie to Zira after everything she had done for him. "I had to know," Marcus said quietly. "I had to understand what's really going on. The truth about the enemy, about why you're hiding." Zira's expression softened, but her eyes were filled with sorrow. "I didn't want you to know. Not like this. But I suppose there's no turning back now." She walked over to him, sitting down at the table. "The enemy we face is unlike anything you've ever seen. They are a species who have no mercy. They don't care about resources or territory. They only care about destruction. When they find us, they will not stop until we are all gone." Marcus listened intently, his mind racing. "But you said you've been working on something to fight back. What is it? How can we stop them?" Zira hesitated for a moment before speaking. "We've been studying their technology, trying to find a way to defend ourselves. We've discovered a weapon, an ancient device that can be activated only by someone with a connection to the planet. It's a weapon that could give us the upper hand, but it's buried deep beneath the surface, hidden away in a place we cannot easily reach." Marcus leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "How do we access it?" Zira's eyes darkened. "That's the problem. The weapon is in a place that only a few of us know about. It's a place that has been forgotten for generations. And even if we find it, we don't know if it will work. We don't know if it's enough to stop the enemy." Thought for a moment, then nodded. "We have to try. I'm not leaving until we do." Zira looked at him, her face filled with uncertainty. "It's dangerous, Marcus. The enemy could be closer than we think. They could already be watching us." "I know," Marcus said. "But we have no choice. We can't keep running." Zira stood up, her resolve hardening. "You're right. We can't run anymore. If we're going to survive, we need to fight. And we need to find that weapon." As Marcus and Zira made their plans to uncover the hidden weapon, a strange sense of purpose filled Marcus's chest. He had come here as a man lost in space, a stranger in a foreign world. But now he was part of something much bigger, fight for survival. He wasn't going to let it slip away. The sun had barely risen when Marcus and Zira set out for the hidden location of the weapon. The day was calm, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air.
Ow.
The weight of the mission pressed on Marcus's shoulders, but there was no turning back now. They had made a decision. They would no longer hide. If the settlers were to survive, they would have to fight. And finding the ancient weapon was their best chance. The journey took them far from the village. The path was treacherous, winding through dense forests and rocky hills. As they walked, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the beauty of the planet. The air was fresh, the landscape untouched by the wars that had ravaged Earth. But it was also a reminder of the settlers' fragile peace. The planet was beautiful, but it had become a prison for them, one that they couldn't escape. Unless they confronted the enemy that hunted them, Zira walked beside him, her pace steady and sure. She had become something more than just a guide to Marcus. She was a symbol of the settlers' strength, their quiet determination to survive. As they walked in silence, Marcus couldn't help but wonder how long they could keep running. Long could they hide from a threat that was always watching, always waiting? "We're almost there," Zira said, breaking the silence. "It's just beyond this ridge." Marcus nodded, feeling his heart race. The weapon, the one that could change everything, was within reach. But there was a lingering fear in his mind. What if it didn't work? What if it was nothing more than a myth, a hope that would never come true? The ridge they climbed was steep, but after a few minutes of climbing, they reached the top. Below them, nestled in a valley, was a large, ancient structure, half buried. Beneath the earth, it looked like a ruin, covered in moss and vines, but there was something unmistakably powerful about it. The air around it hummed with a quiet energy, as though the structure itself was alive, waiting to be awakened. "This is it," Zira whispered. "The weapon is inside." Marcus stared down at the ruin, his mind racing. It didn't look like Much from a distance, just a crumbled stone structure. But Zira's words echoed in his mind. This was their last hope, the only chance they had to fight back. They made their way down the ridge, carefully picking their way through the thick undergrowth. As they reached the entrance of the ruin, Marcus noticed something strange there. Were symbols carved into the stone, markings that seemed to pulse with energy. The symbols were unlike anything he had seen before. They were ancient, almost otherworldly, and yet they felt strangely familiar. Zero knelt in front of the entrance, studying the symbols carefully. "This is where I need your help," she said. "You're the one who can unlock it." Marcus blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "The symbols are not just writing," Zira explained. "They are part of a mechanism, a lock. Only someone with a connection to the planet can open it. I believe you have that connection." Marcus looked at the symbols again, his mind racing. He had been on this planet for weeks, and while he had grown attached to the settlers, he hadn't felt any special connection to the world itself. As he stared at the markings, something inside him clicked. It was as though the planet was calling to him, urging him to step forward. Taking a deep breath, Marcus stepped toward the entrance, his hand hovering over the first symbol. He traced it with his fingers, feeling a strange warmth spread through his skin. The symbols seemed to respond, glowing faintly as his hand moved across them. As he continued, the symbols shifted, rearranging themselves until they formed a pattern. Zira watched in awe as the stone entrance slowly began to shift. The heavy doors groaned and moved, revealing a dark passageway beyond. "It worked," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Marcus stood back, surprised by the power he had unlocked. It had been almost instinctive, a feeling deep inside him that guided his actions. The planet had accepted him, just as Zira had said. And now they were one step closer to their goal. The passageway was narrow, the air musty with age. They moved cautiously, the only sound the soft echo of their footsteps. As they descended deeper into the ruin, Marcus's mind raced with thoughts of what they would find. The weapon hidden away for so long, what kind of power would it hold? Would it be enough to turn the tide against the enemy that hunted them? At the end of the passage, they reached a large chamber, its walls covered in intricate carvings. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it rested a small crystalline object. The object glowed with a soft, pulsing light, radiating an energy that Marcus could feel deep in his bones. "This is it," Zira said, her voice trembling. "The weapon." Marcus stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached out to touch the crystal, but as his fingers brushed against it, a surge of energy shot through him, filling him with an overwhelming sense of power. It was like nothing he had ever felt before, like the entire planet's energy was flowing through him, connecting him to something ancient and unstoppable. For a moment, Marcus stood frozen, his mind awash with visions of distant galaxies, of wars long past, of civilizations rising and falling. The crystal seemed to show him the history of the planet, the struggle for survival, and the hope that had kept the settlers going. Then, just as suddenly, the vision faded. Marcus took a deep breath, steadying himself. He looked at Zira, who was watching him with wide eyes. "It's real," Marcus said, his voice filled with awe. "This is it. This is our chance." Zira nodded, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. "But there's still one problem. The enemy is close. They know we're here." Marcus clenched his fists. "Then we don't wait any longer. We fight." They left the chamber. The weight of their decision hung heavy in the air. The settlers' survival was no longer a question of hiding. It was a question of fighting, and Marcus had made his choice. He would stand with them, no matter the cost.